So first of all, my name is Kelly Watson, and I am the senior judge for today. I am also managing partner of a company called Orange Grove Consulting, and we do human resources consulting, organizational behavior, leadership development, and we do a lot of DEI work. So that is my lens. I would like to introduce, I'll go around and we can start with you, Christine.
Hi, my name is Christine Machado. I'm also a senior judge, and my first year in person. I'm excited to see you guys in person. I've been doing about 7 years. And I was an operations manager and senior vice president in bank. I'll pass it on.
Excellent. All right. Let's go, Anna.
Hi, my name is Anna Tokarska. I was a presenter like you guys years back, so I totally empathize and I'm really excited to see your presentation. I work for the Aerospace Corporation currently in human resources. I support a lot of engineers, and my background is in many different industries, from retail, banking, consumer products, entertainment, and now aerospace.
Hi, nice to meet you guys. I'm Andrew Olson. I also participated in this CAPES competition a while back, 2003, so 20 years ago or so. This is my second time judging, so excited to hear your presentation. I work at Hawkins Way Capital. We're a private equity firm that owns and operates real estate, mainly student housing and hotels and some multifamily across the country.
Wonderful. All right. So I just wanted to remind you, and I have to read the statement to make sure we're consistent, but in this part of the competition, you are taking on a fictional business identity and assigning a fictional business identity to all of us. Please make sure everyone knows who you are and who they are before you begin. You will have 25 minutes to describe the legal, financial, and ethical dimensions of the problem and to recommend a solution that passes muster on all three counts. During this time, teams will be uninterrupted. When you are finished, the judges will ask questions for 10 to 15 minutes. During the Q&A, both you and the judges stay in character. After the Q&A, the judges will give you feedback outside of the role playing. All right? And you may begin.
Hello, esteemed board members. My name is Alexi Darling.
I'm Sydney Rothko.
I'm Sophia Chavez.
And I'm Karina Shetty.
And we are Ethikon Consulting. So, we're here to provide a solution for accidents and derailment issues, specifically with Norfolk Southern. And we plan on doing this by offering a product and service that is the mainline rail vision system. So before I get into the mainline rail vision system, let me talk to you about Rail Vision. Rail Vision is a technology company that is partnered with NVIDIA to develop machine learning and AI services to prevent accidents and derailments in the railway industry. So, what is mainline? It's an infrared camera that will take photos of railways and analyze any damages so workers can then perform any predictive maintenance, as well as identifying any root cause issues, and among many other things as well. So, about that predictive maintenance, it comes into three components: extending asset life, estimating those root causes and failures, and estimating time to failure. So extending asset life, a little self-explanatory, but it's really just about making sure your assets can last longer and provide more value to your company. And then for estimating root causes, saves you time and money to know where the issues are so you can deal with them quicker and faster in the future. And then estimating time to failure, once you know how long an asset has before it needs to be repaired possibly, it gives you a lot more flexibility, especially in Norfolk Southern's case with a little bit of financial damages occurring recently. It'll give you, like I said, more flexibility to kind of maneuver around and fix things. And this is an image of what the infrared camera kind of sees. And these are blemishes on the rails, and it'll help workers, like I said, identify these issues and repair them. And now for the legal portion.
Hello, Norfolk Southern. So, you may be wondering, why Rail Vision? Well, currently you have 31 lawsuits, which represent 100 East Palestinians and about 12 businesses in the area. My colleague Karina will go into further detail about the East Palestine derailment on ethical later, but in the meantime, it's just important to be aware of our product, and it's already been tested and approved in America, the United Kingdom, and Sweden. U.S. railways are privately owned and operated. Established by the federal government was the Consolidated Rail Corporation. So that's a little background. So some lawsuits we've been dealing with are from shareholders, the U.S. government, and State Farm Insurance. The largest one would be Edwin Wang. His business was completely destroyed during the East Palestine derailment. Inoperable, starting from ground zero, so he's requesting $500 million, which is the largest amount of money by far of any other shareholder. But furthermore, we have the U.S. government, specifically the Department of Justice, who filed the lawsuit on behalf of the Environmental Protection Agency, which is the EPA, for violation of CWA, which is the Clean Water Act. State Farm Insurance, honorable mention, representing 2 East Palestinian residents in particular, but $85,000 regardless. So, these are the top 3 allegations currently against Norfolk Southern, and as you can tell, the number 1 allegation, which is noticed on every lawsuit filed, is negligence. So, what is negligence? Negligence is the failure to meet the standard of care that a reasonable person would under similar circumstances. And this is something that Rail Vision would be able to take care of completely. So that's good to know. Strict liability exists when a defendant is liable for committing an action regardless of their mental state. And nuisance, both private and public, would be something that invades or interferes with another's rights or interests by being offensive, annoying, dangerous, or obstructive. So, and then just to sum everything up, obviously, as I was saying, negligence is by far the largest allegation claim that you're facing. And we would be able to save you lots and lots of money, as you are well aware, and preventing future lawsuits. We're a global company. We established a patent in India. But yeah, Rail Vision identifies what needs repairs and prevents future incidents. And AI, so Norfolk Southern laid off a lot of workers in the prior year, which led to current workers being exploited. And yeah, we provide a level of security to prevent derailment accidents, essentially. All right, and with that, I'm going to now pass it over to my colleague Alexi for the financial perspective.
So, as my partner was just mentioning, the East Palestine incident was a massive financial hit for Norfolk Southern. Actually, on your guys' income sheets, the whole East Palestine incident is listed as a $1.1 billion expense. Also, as of April 9th, Norfolk Southern has settled for $600 million in court. So, we're expecting some reductions to net income for the next coming years. This is important to note because there's also other avenues that are hurting Norfolk Southern financially. Specifically, in 2023 alone, there was $43 million lost due to accidents, derailments of any kind, with 313 accidents, as you can see. Between 2018 and 2023, it was $264 million worth of damages. And that's what we're here to fix. We're here to put money back into your pocket and prevent damages like that are unnecessary. It's also important to note that 35% of these damages are caused by human error. That's a big proponent of what we're talking about. So, our solution and our plan. We're aware that Norfolk Southern has plenty of locomotives, 6,000 to be exact, and it's unrealistic to suddenly install all of them with our software and our cameras. So, we developed a 40-year plan. With a $140,000 installment cost per locomotive, it would end up costing $840 million at the end of everything, but we decided to split that up. So, we plan on installing it on 160 cars a year. We targeted 160 specifically because we found that in recent years, that's the average number for human error accidents caused. And we wanted to focus those locomotives that have been impacted by human error and implement it there first and then build off of that. And that would give you an estimated cash flow of $14.5 million in terms of fit savings. And it would cost $22.4 million per year with a payback period of approximately 1.6 years. And Now, back to the predictive maintenance that I was discussing. So this is where the real value of Rail Vision comes in, and how it allows for that, how it allows for the prevention of those human error mistakes. So, as you can see here on this graph, without predictive maintenance, a lot of asset life, specifically in the railroad industry, will kind of follow this downward trend. You're going to lose 12% of your asset life. But with predictive maintenance, if you're making consistent repairs, even while it's healthy, it'll remain healthier and stronger. So here, you're going to get a lot more life out of it. You can see here, it'll approximately end at 14 years for your rail track health, but with predictive maintenance, you can go past 25. And as I mentioned earlier about estimating the root causes, the average asset life, and estimating time to failure, it just gives you more flexibility, more accurate data, and it just allows for you guys to make better, more informed decisions with your own money. It's also important to note that with the human error aspect of it, you can also save more money on labor issues. We mentioned that some Norfolk Southern workers had been under intense conditions at work. By providing them an AI resource, something that can make their jobs easier, they'll be less overworked and less prone to making mistakes and errors. It's also important to note that in a McKinsey study that they were able to find a 5 to 10% increase in efficiency with predictive maintenance regarding maintaining just kind of railways and things like that. And now to kind of give you guys a case study example of how Rail Vision can really help your company. So in this example, we'll be talking about 970 miles of rail. Costs approximately $1.35 billion to install. And that gives it an average yearly maintenance cost of $78,000 per mile, or as you can see, $76 million per year. As I was talking in the previous graph about extending that asset life specifically with predictive maintenance, some railroads may last 20 to 30 years. If you end up with a railroad that is only lasts for 20 years instead of 30, for instance, because those workers of yours, they're very tired, right? You don't have the money, you can't afford to hire more workers and maybe alleviate some of that stress, you're losing $760 million at the end of everything. Those 10 years, that totals up to $760 million. That's money that you can directly use to invest into infrastructure, maybe hire more workers if you deem that necessary, or just put that money back into your pocket. And now onto the ethical portion.
So we've talked a lot about a case study, and the case study that we decided to focus on was the East Palestine train derailment. What essentially occurred was there was an overheating of one of the bearings that resulted in the accident. An outcome of this was that 38 rail cars were derailed, 11 of which held hazardous materials. Additionally, 12 cars were damaged, leaving debris in the excess environment surrounding the accident site. Due to this error, there were 5,000 people who had to be temporarily evacuated from the neighboring community, and by the most recent outcomes, we found that 15,000 pounds of soil had to be disposed of, and 1.1 million gallons of water were removed, which really showed that this placed a really strong impact on negatively affecting the standard of living for those in that community.
Norfolk Southern, you guys know your own mission statement, but basically you guys are saying that you prioritize safety and the well-being of the community that you operate within and the planet that we are on. Unfortunately, with the East Palestine derailment, this mission statement rings hollow. Norfolk Southern needs to begin to put safety and well-being first before short-term profits. Rail Vision can help move towards a safer future. So with derailments, there's two demographics that are particularly at risk. First are civilians. There are millions of Americans that live near freight train tracks, and of these millions, derailments jeopardize the area around them through the potential of chemical spills, which was what happened with the East Palestine one. Workers are also at risk. Workers are the closest to the accidents when they occur, and after accidents, there's always people that have to be hired to clean up and make sure that and make sure that the area that the accident occurred to is back to normal, and those people take on certain risks that we should try to avoid. There's also the potential of layoffs if Norfolk Southern takes a financial hit, which has happened in this past year with huge layoffs. It's also important to understand that with the chemical spills that happened during East Palestine, there were days-long fires. Toxic chemicals were released into the air, affecting the surrounding community, and there's toxic sheen in the water supply. Health issues. Many residents in East Palestine suffered from a myriad of health issues. At first, there were instances of rashes, burns, and lung issues. One man even had seizures after the incident occurred. But still, the residents understand that there's a chance of long-term organ damage. There are carcinogens released into the water supply and into the surrounding area via the burning of the vinyl chloride, which gives the potential of cancer in the future for many residents. And there's also a fear of fetal development issues that might arise. And due to the cleanup, which has been criticized, there's a risk of continuous exposure. Some that still live in East Palestine have to battle with the fact that the water might still be poisoning themselves and their children.
So when we talk about such an issue, we can't look at it from an isolated perspective of just the people. We always talk about maximizing the greater good for the greater amount of people. But as a society, we tend to view people as not just humans themselves, but their environment and the animals around them. We talk about that when we talk about the interconnectedness of living things. So that's why I'm going to go in and focus on aspects of the environment and the wildlife surrounding the site. This is a picture of what occurred during the derailment site, and you can truly see here the scope of how far and how much area was impacted by this accident. When I want to look at this issue, I want to look at it from a short-term perspective and a long-term perspective, based on how dangerous these actions, the results can get if they're not properly taken care of. When we look at it from a short-term perspective, we can see that there are two main categories of habitat destruction and wildlife deaths. When we talk about habitat destruction, we're talking about that initial impact that occurs that sends debris flying into the water systems, into the surrounding environment, hurting animals, making them choke. Anything that you assume typically works with areas of pollution, this is that initial site. When we look at wildlife deaths, what we found during this specific case was that around 40,000 deaths of aquatic life, minnows, amphibians, insects, and other species passed away, to the point where civilians were seeing shores and shores of dead aquatic life washed up. They also reported instances of pet deaths as well as illnesses. So you can see it's truly impacting them from a personal level as well as an entire ecosystem level. When these issues are exacerbated, we get to go into these long-term outcomes that look in the instance of food chain disruption, soil and water contamination, and environmental pollution. So when I just mentioned the wildlife deaths, when they continue and persist, we find a bottom-up processing system of the lowest levels of prey decreasing in population size, and so forth, continuing up this linear path, where the predator of those prey tend to decrease in population size because they have a lack of access to food. We consider food and water to be basic human rights and innate to who we are. So if we have a lack of access to these food chains, going all the way up to affecting humans as well, we've been disregarded an inalienable right. And so that's why this is a really important and pertinent issue that does need to be targeted immediately for an avoidance of a collapse of an entire ecosystem. When we look at soil and water contamination, what was found at these sites is that multiple pounds, as mentioned earlier with the 15,000 pounds of soil and 1.1 million gallons of water, they had to be removed, taken off-site and treated to the point where there is a lack of access to proper fresh produce and well water for people to drink. Initially, it was deemed to be potable, but testing equipment was actually seen to have errors and resulted in a couple people getting sick because the water was actually deemed unsafe. When we look at it from that perspective, we noticed that that can lead to long-lasting impacts to the point where the FDA had to actually intervene and remove the food from the areas because it was deemed contaminated. And when we talk about environmental pollution, it really brings in the holistic aspect of the couple things I've mentioned today and how these things can be pushed into a dangerous cycle where when we talk about maximizing our greatest good, we also want to look into future generations and the environmental implications of that. So the more that we focus on improving our pollution, whether it be airborne, waterborne, we need to make sure that we actually do affect it, because otherwise we deem a collapse of future generations' opportunities to exist with a quality standard of living. Sorry.
Financial harm. Although we've been talking about ecological contamination, there's also a contamination that happened that tainted the name and the economic situation in East Palestine. With a huge ecological disaster such as what happened with the derailment, people do not want to move to or do business in East Palestine, and there's been a sharp decline in seen by small business owners and farms over this. Small business owners lost customers and their workers, as many of the workers moved out of East Palestine, and farms had to bear the potential of contamination for like the food that they're growing, as well as the risk of livestock deaths or just livestock being harmed. Many were required to evacuate, and this upheaval, along with the morale hit of having their community poisoned, led to an economic downturn. This can cause some long-term negative effects to the East Palestine community. People not wanting to do business in East Palestine limits future prosperity that could be gained through that. This also caused property values to lower, and as property values are one of the ways that many Americans build wealth, this can cause like long-term socioeconomic consequences for families in East Palestine. One of the small businesses that we saw in East Palestine was owned by Don and Diana Eltzer. They owned 13 greenhouses in East Palestine, and around 2 weeks after the incident on February 3rd, it was Valentine's Day. And Valentine's Day is a time when they saw a lot of sales, but on that day, even though there were the evacuation order was lifted, they only had 2 sales that day. And for the entire year of 2023, their sales were down by 20%. Corporate social responsibility states that corporate business models should enhance society rather than degrade it. Short-term profit should not ever go above safety, and it's a corporation's responsibility to push for solutions to problems that succeed in the long term. So when looking for what type of solution Norfolk Southern should look for, it should not infringe on the rights of others, specifically the right to life and health, the right to bodily autonomy, and the right to not have public and private property polluted by chemical spills. And these are being risked. We should also try to find a solution that maximizes happiness for the greatest number of parties involved. Can you go back? Rail Vision will help Norfolk Southern abide by these inalienable rights and to pursue the greatest amount of happiness. since Rail Vision provides an extra layer of safety that prevents catastrophes like what happened in East Palestine. It also it's promoting a system with fewer risks to communities and natural environments. It's also notable that our solution would be profitable, which would also benefit Norfolk Southern. One ethical dilemma that comes with a camera, an AI-driven camera, is the possibility of confidentiality. And to address this, we have provided a data protection clause, and the sole use of the AI data that we collect is to improve performance. And it's also important to note that there are already cameras on trains. There's dash cams in use, and there's also cameras on the side that that if there was an issue with privacy, those would be there first before our camera. And it's also important to note that our camera is forward-facing and on the rails instead of potentially picking up information on private citizens. It's also important to note, as Alexi and Sydney were talking about, there's a current strain on workers in Norfolk Southern, and our solution would help lessen their burden through it also mitigates human error, which can lead to the crashes that we saw in East Palestine.
So when we've discussed our solution through Rail Vision, we've focused on a lot of ideas of collision reduction and decreased train derailments. We've seen that in the various aspects legally, financially, and ethically. And looking at that case study of one specific derailment allows us to see how this can be expanded to a myriad of cases. We also should talk about the fact that this uses optimal resource usage, where if you invest in our product and work with us, we are able to mitigate our collisions and train derailments, and therefore put more money and time into Norfolk's properties, where we create a cyclical benefit and use our resources without expending them excessively. This is also beneficial when we talk about the ethical standpoint, where we're no longer using resources flippantly.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, so I heard a lot about the how this is going to look at track defects, and I guess I'm having a difficult time. If 35% were human error, and I know you said it mitigates human error, I'm just having a hard time connecting the dots between this solution and the actual problem that happened in this particular issue. And my concern is, from an ethical perspective, is if we're going to spend this kind of money and we're still going to have derailments because of all the other factors that have gone into this, then I'm just concerned that we haven't addressed the actual problem. So can you tell us how many actual crashes were from the track defect, and therefore how much would this save us in crashes?
Yeah, I can actually answer some of these questions. So you were mentioning about, I'll start off first by mentioning how East Palestine ties into human error and track defects. So what happened in the East Palestine incident was that one of the bearings on the wheels got way too hot, and then it kind of caused a fire, and then the train eventually ended up derailing. When I was discussing human error and things like that, what I was specifically talking about is maintenance workers failing to address or identify these maintenance issues or the quality of the asset health. And if those things get ignored, then you have incidences like East Palestine. If a worker maybe noticed earlier that these bearings were weak, and this was a consistent issue for Norfolk Southern, which there has been identification that this has been a consistent issue, you guys wouldn't be losing $1.1 billion over the next couple of years. As for the other parts of your question, do you mind repeating those, please?
This leads right into it. So if a worker didn't notice a weak bearing, how does this camera looking at the track change that?
Yeah. So what it can actually do is it analyzes the track and how the wheels also connect with the track. So when there's a shift in movement, can maybe notice that, it will notice that these bearings are possibly too weak and that their quality of health is decreasing, and it will measure the force applied and how when the locomotive is traveling along the tracks, how if it shifts to one side in particular, that these bearings and wheels on that particular side are weaker. As a result, it tells us that, okay, we have issues with asset health here. We need to replace these or perform predictive maintenance and extend that and make sure it's up to the standards so we can prevent something like this happening.
A lot of our solution relies on the idea of prevention rather than dealing with things after the fact. If we're able to catch it ahead of time, like what he's saying, we no longer have to worry about kind of having this thing get to the extent that it did. We're actually preventing it from even getting to the spark happening. We stopped it before that.
Okay, Christine, do you want to ask?
Yeah, thank you, because that was one of my questions as well. My question was in the beginning about the data that's in the software. Do we have to feed data into it, or what type of updates?
Yeah, I can actually answer that question. So I'll give you a brief overview of maintenance and sensors with
Okay.
trains. So they've been evolving. So obviously, since the beginning of the 20th century, we didn't really have any data. So we didn't have really electricity or computers involved with trains. But since then, in more recent years, we've shifted. The railway industry has shifted towards implementing sensors across trains on every single aspect point. So like wheel bearing points and all these things. And what the AI is doing, it's collecting all this information and then it's learning about it. So when we're talking about those root causes, right? If it finds that, okay, wow, for some reason wheel bearings on these specific trains are seemingly dying really quickly or getting affected, or maybe the sensors aren't reading them properly, and we're finding maybe either a lack of data or overwhelming amounts of data showing that there's issues with this, then the AI program can identify that. But it will figure that out by analyzing the force and how the locomotive shifts along the rails.
We've also
That
mentioned
makes
that this is a global company and it has already been implemented in areas in the US and the UK.
Yeah.
So it does already have data points that have been shown to be effective.
Okay. And then Sophia, I think you talked about the AI component and the ethical portion. So what part of the AI is able to be used and not affecting the ethics?
So since the AI is, looking at the track directly, it's not picking up data on private citizens. And when we look at unethical surveillance, it's the fact that a private company might be able to pick up information on private citizens. And since the AI is focused entirely on Norfolk Southern tracks, it won't be used to with those.
Actually, I did some research on this as well, and Norfolk Southern is headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia, and the laws around technology and AI, in particular privacy as well, they're very broad. They're not touched on as much lately as healthcare specifically. There's been a lot about healthcare and AI in Georgia.
Right. Okay. Thank you. That helps from a legal perspective.
All right, Anna, would you like to do that?
Yeah, I have a question, you guys. In the accuracy and reliability of the AI data, and especially because training the language models, is this the only technology, or are there other competitors that have this information available, or is this the only one that's available? Obviously, if it's just one company out there that's providing it, I just wanted to know what other options are there for including this type of technology besides.
Yeah, so there are no other third-party companies, and what I mean by that is, railway owning companies that are developing any kind of technology like this. BNSF Railways, they have developed some of their own systems. However, there's not a lot of clarity or information regarding those systems. However, they are trying to start to implement AI into this. So we're trying to give you guys a head start on your other competitors.
Okay. And then one other question is, with some of the information, especially as the language models are learning, because there's particles in the air and everything, and you guys talked about, and I'm not a scientist, so with the heating up of either the tracks or the coils or the bearings.
Yes.
In the AI models, are they testing that specifically? Different weather conditions. How's the data look like for actually the testing and training the language models for these cameras? Do you guys have any information on that?
Yeah, unfortunately that data is somewhat limited. However, with the benefits of having an infrared camera is that things such as particles and pollutions and whatnot won't really affect the learning. At least there was no mention of that. So as it seems, the infrared cameras can work pretty much in any condition.
I would also like to mention, we do have a patent on the technology, going back to your first question, and we're partnered with NVIDIA, as Alexi said in the beginning, so we're a more well-known company. And one other thing was, so we've already been tested in America, the United Kingdom, and Sweden, so we've been around for a while, so as far as weather conditions go, we have a lot of experience in the field, and we feel that we're the best company for you.
All right, thank you. And Andrew?
Yeah, kind of go back to the financial impact question. I think you mentioned the cost was going to be something like $140,000 per locomotive.
Per installment, yeah.
But how does, this technology is just going to identify issues the most, like how much are we going to still spend on maintenance, right? Because we're still going to have to fix tracks and fix bearings and fix things, right? So this is just going to identify the problem, or is that built into your analysis of because you're saying we're saving $760 million.
Yeah. If you, I mentioned the payback, if you can go back, the payback period and those estimated cash flows. So those estimated cash flows, can you go back again? Sorry. Yeah. So right here, that $14.5 million, those are the numbers specifically only on human error that you're going to be saving, right? Because obviously anything that's doing predictive maintenance, it's not actually bringing in any kind of revenue or anything like that. But that $14.5 million, those are the costs you're avoiding by installing that and avoiding the human error.
Yeah, I guess maybe you can clarify. Like, so what are your? Because the human error, as I understand it, is a maintenance worker missing something,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And then that what is that? The cost you're then saying is that if that then an issue arises with that track, and we have to fix an accident or fix a derailment.
Yeah.
That's the cash that we're saving, right?
Yeah.
But I guess so you prevent that, but then you still have to spend money in advance to maybe replace a section of track. Maybe that's not as expensive, but
Yeah.
I was just curious how much, in terms of just overall general maintenance, are we going to either increase temporarily, or are we going to save money on general maintenance, or is that going to not sort of be unchanged? We're just saving on potential derailment costs.
Yeah, so you're going to be saving on specifically like derailment costs themselves. Also, it was kind of hard to find any data showing, because it's relatively private information, but you can expect savings on yearly maintenance. As I mentioned earlier, it's approximately $76,000 per mile. This was like kind of the mean out of the range, because the range can vary from $33,000 to $120,000. But if you're saving $14.5 million, you will see your yearly maintenance for rails decrease.
Can I add one more thing, or are we done?
Sorry.
Okay.
We have to stick to the time, but all right. So now we're in the phase where we are losing our hats. We are no longer the, and we can give feedback. So I'll start. I just want to say, excellent, clear intro. I love that you told us exactly what you were doing. I can't stand when presentations take me 15 minutes to figure out what we're doing. So that was really great. Consider losing the cue cards and the paper and everything else and just talking to us. I know you're nervous and your students and everything, but you know this stuff, and I know you know it because when we do Q&A, you're all over it. So it's communicate with your audience. You don't need prompts. You don't need anything. It's all there. And don't look at the slide, because we can see the slide. I appreciated the legal definitions. I thought that was super helpful for us, and love the connection to the broader community impact. Like, you guys went down rat holes I hadn't even thought of, and that was fabulous, because I think it is important for people to understand all of the impacts of this stuff. I want to go back to this last comment though, like, you really, and I know you're selling, but you've overinflated, I think, the impact. There's a lot, human error is a broad category that describes a lot of things that can go wrong. And, while there also are probably some maintenance issues and stuff that this would save, I think this is potentially a drop in the bucket when you consider all of the other things. So I think it's great, but I think be careful not to overblow it so much that you're going to solve all the human error or all of the track defect issues with this. But I do think it's a really cool solution. So yeah, I'm going to go next.
Sure. Yeah, I think you guys did a really good job presenting, and I was very impressed in how succinctly you came back with your answers, and like she said, you definitely knew the data, right, when it came back to things, and you were able to dig things out. Just a little stumbling on some of the presenting, just trying to remember your script, but I think you could have flown through it greatly. So good job on that. And I like your solution. I like what you guys are talking about, and I think that you really tied the financials to the legal and all of the ethics, so good job.
Anna?
Yeah, I also thought you guys did a really great job. Just from your slide and your presentation, I could tell that you guys took a lot of time and it was very thorough. So that was very impressive. I loved the information on the environmental and the ethical impact. It really tied into the introduction of what the cost is. But I also would say that this is more probably like a three-prong approach of, you know, what are the mitigation options? Because, you know, we can't probably stop derailments from happening, but there's this huge other impact. And how do we, from an ethical standpoint, address that for everybody who's impacted by it? So I would have liked to see something along those lines, that it's not just one solution, because then you can like pigeonhole yourself. The other thing I would say is for also solutions, look outside the industry. I'm thinking of like oil tankers and what kind of technologies they've used, you know, and what kind of mitigation plans they have for oil spills. So just be more broad to see what your options, because when you're coming to the board, you really want to come up with solutions that are outside the box, and then you know, being more of a you know, influencer for other industries, or like you said, you guys have a really competitive edge because you're the only technology, but other people, you know, other groups will also follow. So I think just to be more broad would be great. But great job, you guys.
Yeah, I think I'm going to kind of mirror a lot of what everyone said. But yeah, great presentation. I really liked your analysis. I think, you know, broad picture, you know, I think you had a lot of the answers, but they sort of weren't linked, at least when you initially presented it. So, you know, but through the Q&A, we could tell that obviously you guys have done a lot of research and studied this stuff. So I always tell people, do a couple of dry runs for presentation in front of friends or peers or something like that, and just sort of get that out a couple times, because then you won't need cue cards as much. You won't have to sort of kind of go back to your notes. You'll sort of have a little bit more of it ready, and then other folks will help you identify, okay, yeah, I saw these 2 points, but there's a link that you have that you just weren't presenting. So it's just good to sort of, you know, do those dry runs in front of other folks. I'd say a couple areas, I think, you know, to areas to like say to think about if you're going to sort of take this a little bit to the next level. I would say on the financial side, yeah, I think you should think about it from a few more angles of, obviously, yes, there's a savings on derailments, but are we going to solve all of our derailment issues? You know, maybe not. There's still going to be maybe some percentage. And then just trying to figure out, like, how does this fit into the bigger picture of, you know, obviously we're going to have annual CapEx spend that we're going to be targeting towards different projects. So,
Yeah.
you know, again, maybe it's not public data, but it's like understanding where they're focusing their dollars today,
Yeah.
and to say, okay, maybe you could spend your money on this project instead, or maybe this is in addition to something else that you're doing. And I think one thing that's always interesting to think about too is competitors as well, like in the railroad space. What are your peers doing? What are our peers doing? Or saying, you know, is the other rail company implementing this technology or doing something better, or doing something more to sort of make themselves stand out? Because, you know, sometimes people get motivated by the fact that the competitive company is doing something better than they are, so suddenly it becomes more interesting, right? If I, you know, and some may not care, but that's sort of an interesting thing to say, what's going on in the industry. And I think the last thing is maybe just to think about, I don't know the answer to this, but I don't know about like just regulation in general. Are there things coming this way in this industry that all the owners and operators of railroads have to sort of start thinking about? Maybe there's new laws coming on the books in 10 years or something like that sort of forces the issue a little bit. So if there's stuff like that out there, and maybe there's not, and if there's not, you can sort of spin it the other way and say you can be a first mover and a leader and all that. But I think if you can sort of figure out what's going on in the regulatory environment as well, that can help sort of influence your pitch. So, but overall, you know, great presentation. We appreciate you guys' thoughtfulness and the time you spent putting this together. So thank you.
Thank you for the feedback.
Yeah.
Amazing feedback. Thank you.
All right, great. Thanks so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.